those verses were miraculous verses showing things that we just discovered a few years ago, 10, 50 years ago, that was revealed in the book 1,400 years ago. Now he, from his perspective, he just thought, no, they must have mistranslated. You know, they must have put some words in it. And he actually took a journey to learning the Arabic language, and he wrote a book, the Quran and the Bible and Modern Science, you know, explaining his journey. So it's never too late. I've taught people who are, you know, over 50 years old. I've taught housewives. I've taught doctors. I've taught, you know, bank chairmen. And so it's a wide range of people, you know, but if there's that hunger, you know, and it's usually an insatiable hunger that some people, it would just lead them, like one of my students, led him to memorizing hundreds of poems, you know, and as I said, he's now my teacher. Every time he sees me, he sits me down for 2-3 minutes and teaches me something in balagha that I didn't know before. Balagha is rhetoric, you know, that I didn't know before in Arabic language. Right?
All right, there's that question, just a written question. I heard the Quran is a medicine. I have a skill problem. If I read Quran a lot, would my skill problem heal, and can you recommend any sort of problem in the Quran?
This is the part I say, La adri, I don't know. So the first part of the question, yes, the Quran is a healing. Can I recommend it? I don't know. Sorry, I warned you that if it reaches my little level, I'm going to say that. Apologies.
I just see this about your name at one point with the Gordon Ibn Nalawi, which from, you know, from the Prophet's time.
The Medicine of the Prophet by Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawzi.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good book to read. But, you know, so that aspect, I don't know.
Is this straight at that?
Yeah, would you advise to learn the Arabic language first and then approach, inshallah, memorization of the Quran, or?
Would you advise
learning the Arabic language first or memorizing the Quran first?
I mean, it's easier if you have a knowledge of Arabic to start.
I would advise to do both, because they're not both mutually exclusive. You know, so while I personally, when I learned Arabic language, I was doing both at the same time. So I was memorizing and learning the language. And in fact, one of the beautiful things about that was the vast majority of the Arabic grammar rules that I learned them via the Quran. You know, so the rule of numbers, ahada ashara kawkaba, you know, the verse in the Quran. You know, the rule of idafa, abdullah, you know, baytullah, and all these words that I already knew the words, but I didn't know what they meant. So you can do both definitely. In fact, it actually helps you when you're doing both at the same time. Some of my best students have been students, you know, that one of our sisters is here that have actually been memorizing, or have already memorized the Quran. And when I say something, when I teach them a new rule, they go, ah, that's why that verse means this, and that's why that. And so both are definitely not mutually exclusive. You can do both at the same time.
How would you start to memorize the Quran? Listening?
So there are many ways of memorizing. Listening is a way of memorizing, but it's, you know, the best way is to actually have a teacher who, if you cannot read, right, you have someone that's, you know, where there's a traditional way is that you read to a teacher and the teacher listens to you and corrects you, and then, you know, what I used to do back then with Tajweed, I would record myself, you know, and then I would read to the teacher would, you know, correct me, and then I would go back, you know, correct myself, and then come back and actually recite again. So in the absence of not actually being able to read, then listening, if you listen to very slow recitations, can help as a beginning, you know, and then when you think you know what you're saying, when you think you can repeat it back, sit down in front of someone who actually knows it and check whether you know, accidentally missed some words. But both are not mutually exclusive, yes.
Could you explain what Tajweed and Tarteel is?
Right, Tajweed, the word Tajweed comes from the word jawwada or jada, which is to make it. Tajweed is from jawwada, which is to make beautiful, right? And Tajweed of the Quran is, as istilahan, conventionally, is to pronounce every single word from its correct root. So every single word has its, what we call its makhraj, you know, its origin, its exit part, right? If you pronounce a word different from its exit, then in many cases you're actually changing the meaning. You know, I give my students many examples. So for example, what do you say if someone comes to you while you're fasting and tries to abuse you, or abuses you, or shouts at you? What do you say to the person in Arabic? Allahumma inni sa'im. You say, oh God, I'm fasting. But you don't say that to him. You turn to God, oh God, I'm fasting. Now, the word sa'im, right? If you can't pronounce sa'd very well with a tafkhim, and if you say inni sa'im, right? Now, instead of saying I'm fasting, you're actually saying I'm bored. Okay? You see the difference? So that totally changes the meaning. Many other words, for example, the word for someone who is obedient in the Arabic language is a qanit with a ta. The word for someone who has lost hope in God's mercy is a qanit with a ta. Right? So if you cannot pronounce ta very well, then you're calling someone who's lost hope in God's mercy with an obedient person. Many examples of this in the Quran. Qul means say. Kul means eat. Okay? So you see the difference? If you can't pronounce off, instead of saying qul, you're saying eat. Right? So, I mean, many of... But now, having said that, now the question is, what if, you're just learning and you're making these mistakes? Bilal, radhiyallahu anhu, he had one of the same problem where he couldn't pronounce sword, I think, very well. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, he used to pronounce sword as sh, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, Bilal's shin is sword in the sight of Allah. So of course, in the absence of where it's actually for some people very difficult for them, then of course Allah knows what you're trying to say. But it's very important to actually learn the language, to know exactly how it's recited. So tajweed is to pronounce every word. Tartil, warattil al-Qur'ana tartila. It's actually an order in the Quran. Recite the Quran in a very slow, rhythmic way. Now, tartil is that you're actually prolonging, you're reciting in a slow manner. Why? So that you actually ponder while reciting. One of the best qira'ats that I enjoy the most are people who are able to, do tafsir of the Quran with their voice. Right? That you actually listen, if you understand the language, you listen to it, they're explaining it with their voice. Anyone who wants to, and I don't know this guy, I've never met him, but if you listen to Tawfiq As-Sa'il, he's excellent at this. He just by listening to what he's saying, he's not very slow, but to do tafsir with the voice. But tartil is to recite in a slow way. And if you're reading anything, and you force yourself to recite it in a slow way, you see there's hikmah behind the rules of tajweed. Was-sama, it forces you to think about sama. Who man khalaqa as-sama? Man rabbu as-sama? Was-samaa'i wat-tariq. It forces you to stop and actually think. And so on and so. So there is all this is different aspect of that beyond this, but all these tartil forces you to actually think about what you're reciting. Because what's that? Yeah, and sama is the sky, heaven. What did I say? All right. Sorry. Sama means sky. Sorry, I did say I was going to try not to use Arabic words which people wouldn't. But when you in the Arabic language, in tajweed, when you're reciting was sama, you have to. It's compulsory that you recite it for what we call 5 haraka, like 3 to 5 seconds, right? Now, by doing that, and it means sky, it forces you to think about it, right? And the Quran is like that. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he used to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, he used to prolong the end. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Because you think about it, who is Rabbil Alameen? Who is the Lord of the worlds? Man, I'm standing in front of him. What does that mean? Right? How do I feel? Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Who is Ar-Rahim? What is this Rahman? Right? It forces you to think about it. Maliki Yawmiddin. The master, the owner of the day. What is Yawmiddin? What is Deen? On a day which nothing will benefit you but your Deen. Deen is, the day of the resurrection, the day where all debts will be paid back. So by reciting it in a slow way, it actually forces you to think about it. If you give yourself that opportunity. Sorry.
Father, I hope you don't mind me asking this,
No.
but I've always wanted to have the opportunity to go and travel abroad to study tafsir. Even though I have a very basic understanding of Arabic, it's more to learn the wisdom of the Quran. Obviously, I don't have 3 months to do that.
Yeah.
Is there somewhere that you can recommend in London as a MisbahInstitute to learn from?
So what I can only say that I've learned from certain teachers that have been very, very good in actually teaching the tafsir and actually being able to teach it in the context. But I have not broadened. I've not really like gone around and actually checked other institutes. And I can tell you of a particular teacher that I learned from. You know that he still teaches, but I'm not sure whether what he's teaching right now is tafsir. But when I learned under him, went through the tafsir of Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Isra, Surah Al-Hajj, and all many of these ahadith that you're right. Without understanding or actually learning